So I'm David Glover, I'm Head of Science at Channel 4, Commissioning Editor at Specialist Factual. Before I introduce you to the panel, just one quick thing. Making really great science television programs isn't easy. And if you think it is, you're wrong. I mean, a lot of TV executives think you can just throw together, a few charismatic young scientists, do some Brainiac-style stunts, and you'll have a hit show on your hands or something of quality. The truth is, often it's rubbish. So if you did believe that, well, bang goes that theory. Anyway, let me tell you, I've got an amazing panel, and they don't need any reverence. I know them all really well, so I'm going to feel free to wind them up and take a piss, and generally tell you how they really are, and their foils and foibles and all that stuff. But they are brilliant. So let's start with Cassian Harrison, representing the BBC, formerly of Lion Television. Actually, as a producer, I think made a classic documentary called Behind the Veil in Afghanistan, one of the great documentaries. And then his career reached a pinnacle when he started making Channel 4 science programs for me. Some rather brilliant and original stuff, rather low rating if I remember, but it was still brilliant. And then sadly, his career took a nosedive as he joined the BBC. And he's been living in obscurity ever since. What I can tell you about him is that he's absolutely loaded with money, and he doesn't care about ratings. So feel free to bother him during the said festival at any time. His door is always open. Next to him is Maggie Adderin, who is a privilege to have on the panel. She's an actual scientist, a space scientist and TV presenter, and is going to be the future face of a lot of science television. She recently did a fantastic program on BBC Two about the moon. Beforehand, actually, I spotted Maggie and I knew she was going to be a talent. I remember saying to my boss, when it comes to the wonders of the solar system, there's only one person that can present on that. And of course, I was wrong. Next to her is Kate Milton, who's also sometimes a TV presenter, but also works at Channel 4 as commissioning editor for online in documentaries and specialist factual. So the future is bound to be interactive in some way. We're going to have to interact with our audience, whether the audience wants to or not, as she found out on 7 days. And finally, we've got Sanjay Singhal. First came to prominence making the best ever series of The Apprentice, but he's now a huge cheese and in his own right as boss of Dragonfly. Super cool indie. They're responsible for hits like The Family and One Born Every Minute. When it comes to documentaries, Sanjay is your man. When it comes to science, his track record is less clear. And in fact, he was asking me the other day, what am I doing on this panel, David? And I didn't have the answer. I thought possibly it's because he's too important to be in the audience these days. And if he wants to turn up to a session, he has to be on the panel. But actually, the Wellcome Trust tell me he does have a role. And his role is basically science television as shock and awe. Now, before he introduces himself, I'm going to let them all introduce themselves and show you what they do before we start the discussion. But Sanjay's stuff actually does come with a health warning that, what do we say? Certain viewers of a squeamish nature might find the following clips disturbing. Sanjay, what do you do? Why are you here? What are your clips?
Right, I think my clips are, because I think you changed the order about 5 minutes ago, David, just to confuse me. But I think the clips that we're going to show you are from two programmes. One was a programme ran for many years on BBC called Kill It, Cook It, Eat It. And the other programme is one commissioned by David Glover, in fact, so it'd be hard to see how he's going to criticise this show. And it was called Jamie Oliver, Eat to Save Your Life.
Should we show those clips, please?
Now he's making a incision from the top of those hind legs all the way down.
That's right.
And there come the cuts.
So he's going into the abdominal cavity, and now we're reflecting out the intestines. So the intestines are coming forward as we're looking there now, stomach just about appearing in the intestines themselves.
Now, is this a more delicate procedure on piglets?
The whole process is delicate. You notice the way in which they're handling the knives, the way they're working, and trying to ensure that there's no damage done in that process. As the coming right down to the liver is now still attached. So he's leaving the liver there. because he's now going to go forward from that and go into the chest area.
And do we have another clip of, what's the other one we're going to
I think the other one we're going to show is Eat to Save Your Life.
Jamie Oliver's Eat to Save Your Life, if you can find that one. I thought that animal dissection looked quite interesting. The animal wasn't big enough for my taste. I think you should dissect much bigger animals, really, Sanjay. It's much more thrilling than a little pig. But there we are.
Sorry. We have size restriction at the BBC.
We're now going to look at the effect in which a whole life of eating junk has on your body.
I will start now the dissection. I will take the abdominal wall and the thoracic wall in one piece away. In one large plate. We know from the patient history that he suffered from a chronic heart insufficiency, high blood pressure, as well as diabetes.
I mean, it's pretty shocking stuff, isn't it? And the guy on the slab looks like he could be a member of another family. You know, do you broadcast anything? Is there anything you wouldn't broadcast, Sanj? I mean, make programs about? I mean, do you draw a line anywhere? Or are you happy? You know, what about cannibalism next?
The answer to that is I can't think of an area which I wouldn't go into as long as you tackle it in the right way. I think the questions for me, ultimately, you're right, we don't have a huge history of science programming, and the ones we do, I suppose, are fairly unconventional. But I think the questions for me would be, can we find new and interesting ways of doing science? Can we bring them to an audience that's, that likes to watch its science, would like to find different ways of engaging with science in different parts of the audience and may not watch very conventional treatments. But ultimately, is there something new and interesting to say? And therefore, yes, cannibalism, why not? We did actually have an idea which we pitched to you, which was the human recipe book, which I think you turned down. But I think if there is something interesting to learn about it, then why not? It's a matter about how it's done, whether it can be done tastefully and whether it can be done with information and content.
Sure, okay, fair enough. I don't mean to interrupt. It's not that we're running out of time, but I have a low boredom threshold. Basically, but if you find Sanjay's stuff a little, bit too kind of gory, a bit too distressing, a bit too upsetting, perhaps you'll prefer the lukewarm bath of the BBC's output. Kassim,
Yes.
do you want to introduce what you
Yes,
do?
I mean, I will play it just to get everyone snoozing. If you were at the specialist factual panel yesterday, apologies again because you've already been bored by this one, but let's roll. It was 3 minutes. I should say that I do history and science. I prep this. There's a little bit of history in there, just to give you a little soupçon of variety, but that has science too. Off we go.
Every rock on this planet, every living thing, every piece of you and me was forged in the furnaces of space.
I think we're here.
When that 109 caught me off that hurdle, I remember thinking, if you get away with this, you'll get away with anything.
If Balaban can't catch a fox, Beric may have to let her go and find another eagle to train.
For the 25 years I've taught classics at Cambridge, I've been fascinated by what life was really like, day to day, in ancient Pompeii. There is absolutely no circulation of water at all in this pool. All the people who piss in here, their sweat, it all comes into a steaming, hot, watery mass.
It's very exciting be able to take the skills that we use on a daily basis and apply them to look at historical skeletons to see just how far we can go.
Being a statistician, you don't like telling your profession at dinner parties. But really, statisticians shouldn't be shy because everyone wants to understand what's going on. And statistics gives us a perspective on the world we live in that we can't get in any other way.
The whole point of the grand circuit in these Georgian houses is to fill it up with people in a great big party situation, isn't it?
Yes.
They're a bit like just an enormous nightclub.
The First World War had begun.
It's got a letter for you.
On the 4th of August 1914, war was declared and recruitment started without delay.
Don't stop going. It's not going.
Although the men are only going to spend time away from the street, it dawns on Caroline how it must have felt for women in her position.
It's 15.
It's going to be a complete mystery.
Slightly nervous, if anything. I'm thinking, what am I doing? To me, funnily enough, 70s doesn't seem that far away.
This is a lovely car. Is it new? Because it looks new.
Hysterical. Is this really like this in the 70s? Honestly.
So, maybe you just quickly give us something to explain what those things have in common other than it seems to be television for old people.
Television.
Or just everybody, no, I'm joking. What unites that? What's the thinking? Just in a few lines, so people get a sense of.
Absolutely. I mean, well, there's 3 channels that I look after, and there's BBC 3 as well, and they've got to do 3 very different things. So there's BBC 1, which is, it's a big channel where we got to appeal to everybody and the broadest possible audiences. So that gives you things like Young Guns, where we take celebrities and use them to drive a scientific experiment. There's BBC 2, which you're probably going to knock because, yes, it is quite a conservative channel to a certain extent. We have audiences, we've got to look after an audience which doesn't particularly want to be challenged hugely. It wants good, familiar, authentic content. And then we've got BBC 4, which I really love and really enjoy, where we can try almost anything. And we do try almost anything. That's how it divides down.
That's very helpful, okay. Yeah, thank you. Good. I don't think you're so aggressive in this panel, really. I'm not trying to take an hour and a half of argument. Maggie, you're an actual scientist. You're becoming a presenter. Maybe you could just tell the audience just a bit about what you've been up to and your first impressions of becoming a kind of TV presenter in the modern world of science television.
I've been a scientist for, I think, well over 15, a professional scientist for well over 15 years now. And for a long time I thought, I just like talking to people about science. And so when the opportunity arose to actually do it on TV, I think I've seen about 70,000 school kids going to schools, in venues, but to do it on TV, reach so many more people. But I must admit, the most exciting thing that came to my mind is how inefficient television is. I'm terribly sorry. Because, for instance, I was in Palma earlier this week doing some filming, and it's just so slow. As a scientist, you try and find efficiency in everything, and you sort of think, how can this work? You spend sort of 4 weeks filming for a 1-hour documentary. It just sort of seems very strange that way, but very exciting as well, because it's the opportunity to sell science to people. Because when I first started science communication, I'll tell people I'm a scientist at a dinner party, and see them go, nice weather we're having, I can wait slowly, she's a scientist. And so the idea of actually trying to make science accessible and trying to make science fun is a really wonderful experience for me. And I got the bug so much that I actually tried to make my own documentary a few years ago, and we might show a clip from that later. But it's just trying to find new ways of engaging people, and I try and do that through my talks. And through television, I think this is much more challenging. But if you get it right, you open up a whole new world for many, many people, which is a wonderful thing to do.
Right, maybe we should, first of all, speak into the microphone, you'll get the hang of that. And basically, if we could show a clip of Maggie in action, that would be great. That's
where did it be? No, that's the wrong one.
These are the Falls of Laura. That's what the locals call them. In Gaelic, Laura means noisy.
Well, maybe you could lip sync what you're saying.
I have to do the action.
I think we got it, here we go.
These are the Falls of Laura. That's what the locals call them. In Gaelic, Laura means noisy. Because as the tidal waters rush out of the loch, it gets very, very loud.
Twice.
Great. Okay, and then Kate, if we can set out your stall just briefly. Kate's basically, obviously the session's about the future of science television, and Kate's very interested in online and how to use it. Maybe you could tell them a bit about who you are, what you're up to, and show a clip of the kind of stuff that might be kind of online friendly.
Okay, so hello. I have been working with David now only since January this year, so we're yet to really actually...
Feels like a lifetime though, doesn't it?
In a good way. So we've only been working together since January, and we haven't actually got a project out the door together yet, have we? But I wanted to show you a clip of Surgery Live, which is something that came out of Channel 4, and Adam G was the commissioner on that project. So maybe we can just run that now.
So we need to do some speech tasks now. Is it okay to talk now?
Yeah. Now, Peter, can you hear me?
Okay.
Good. Well,
Start
let's
going
do some
down.
counting. Okay, nice and slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Loud as you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
1, 2, 3,
A bit louder.
4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Bit quicker.
8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, Just start 19, again. 20.
Okay, from 1 again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 21, 22, 23, 24.
We should stop it there.
Okay, relax.
It's not saying much for interactive television, is it?
That's one of my programmes you're butchering there. That's a fascinating bit of television. That's someone having a conscious craniotomy live on Channel 4. And they're testing which bit of his brain is actually involved in his speech. And we actually had him answering questions from Twitter as he was undergoing his brain surgery. So that's why. So that comes out later. You know, I asked the questions here, guys. Sorry. Well, no, I mean, it's a very useful form of interactivity. The modern way of doing science. It's the future, Cassie. You living in the past over there at BBC Two.
But David, it was the first. It was the first TV programme.
First time when someone's live answered questions from Twitter.
With a brain
to use Twitter in that way, and that was 2009, and we're in a totally different spot with Twitter now, as in the uptake has just massively kind of mushroomed from kind of where we were in 2009. But it was the first, so for that we should be proud. And from that, we've gone on to do Embarrassing Bodies Live, which was a live spin-off off the back of Embarrassing Bodies. And then also the next progression along that track is Live from the Clinic, which you may have watched recently. It goes out on Wednesdays, 8 o'clock, half-hour show, where people at home actually Skype in their illnesses, ailments, fat bellies, weeping wounds, whatever it is. But yeah, it's an interesting experiment in that space, and it is kind of interactivity to the max, really.
Can I ask a cheeky question? Because one thing I don't understand about Embarrassing Bodies Live is all these people come up and say, I'm so embarrassed, I can't go and see my doctor. So here it is, live on TV.
I know.
Last year we had the person who was the commissioner for Embarrassing Bodies. They call it the riddle of the sphincter. That question. The riddle of the sphincter. Why the hell anyone goes on that programme is a mystery to me as well, Maggie. But let's not go there right now. So now, let's give it a bit of focus, shall we? Basically, this is about what is the future of science television, which way is it going? So you've got a very illustrious panel there who should be able to tell us. So what we're going to do is we're going to show a few clips of different kinds of approaches to science TV, run the whole gamut, and then you guys can feel free to chip in, slag it off, and whoever made it will have to try and have a go at defending it, or also discussing really whether is this the way forward or is this the way past, or that kind of stuff. You get the idea. Should we kick off with a bit of BBC chemistry, electricity?
Yeah.
This is a sort of authoritative, actual scientist presenter style television programme.
I haven't seen this, by the way, so let's hope it's all right.
You won't be alone with that.
execution of William Kemmler marked the lowest point in the War of the Currents, but it wouldn't quite mark the end, because Nikola Tesla was about to do something that had never been seen before, something so wondrous and daring that it would live on forever in the memories of those who saw it.
I'm actually a fan of Janako. He's great. But do you think it really matters to have someone that actually knows what he's talking about or not?
Yes, I think it really does in the context of Jim. I think what Jim's got a particular and unique talent, which is that he's incredibly good at just holding a story and telling the story of science in a way that keeps you engaged. And I've done lots of, a fair number of films with him because he's, he has the authority and the knowledge that gives him a gravity that I think audiences believe in and audiences trust. And I do think that's important. I don't think that we could have, that BBC4 series, big three-parter on the whole story of electricity, lots of really quite complicated science in there. And if it was just somebody that we put up there because they looked good or they were entertaining, I just don't think it would work.
It works for Brian Cox, but anyway, what about so he's actually a physicist, isn't he?
He is actually
we get on to it later. I'm a bit obsessed, as you can tell.
You are,
I'm a bit
indeed.
obsessed.
All right.
No, okay, but is it the future though? I mean, are we going to do it? It's been going on for years.
Yeah, exactly.
The presenter does a piece to camera, a bit of a stuff, you know what I mean?
But what you have
just churn it out. What about a bit of innovation, Cassie?
We've done plenty of innovation, and I'm going to show some. But what you have to not forget is that science as a subject, one, we've got audiences that are growing, and we have new audiences which come to television and they want to, to encounter stories. We have a kind of duty, particularly at the BBC, or not a duty, but we think it's very important to be continuing to tell the story of science to our audiences. We're not doing the same subjects every year, but every 10 years, I think we do have a duty to come back and re-explain and re-explore particular subjects in particular areas.
Okay, that makes a good case, doesn't it? But what we might do actually, I've just thought it might be fun to put clips in opposition against each other and see if the audience agrees with you, Cassie. So that's what you did with electricity.
Yeah.
Let's see what Sanjay did with electricity. Or Bravo. If we could have the Gavin Henderson clip, please. This is what Sanjay does with the science of electricity.
I think, yeah.
Over the next 60 minutes, Greg is going to run through a series of scientific demonstrations that he believes will categorically prove you can take 750,000 volts to the head and live. Gavin never backs out of a rut, but can Greg persuade him to tackle the Tesla?
The audience clapping there for a second.
You do a lot of this sort of stuff, factual theatre. I remember we kind of, talk about that as a genre, but I mean, this sort of stunt, you know what I mean? Is this worth doing? Is this really better than the more serious stuff? Yeah, what's the point of that?
What's the point of that?
Yeah.
I mean, extraordinary you asked that question. The point of that is actually to bring the subject matter alive to an audience that isn't going to sit around in its tens of thousands and watch it on BBC4. It's bringing it to a young male audience, very successfully on multi-channel. It's trying to bring an audience that doesn't give a damn about science or electricity and saying, okay, we're going to bring in somebody who's going to do genuine science experiments. Greg Lightfoot there, by the way, is an established scientist, has been on BBC 3, in fact, before. And trying to say we can make science fun, we can make it engaging. It's packed full of content all the way through, but done through a number of quite shocking experiments that put a celebrity at the heart of it. Actually, we changed the title of that to call it How to Kill a Celebrity.
Yeah.
And the idea was basically in every programme to have a different celebrity going through a number of different scientific stunts, put them in genuine danger, and through that unpack the science of that relative subject. So I thought it was pretty ambitious.
But there
pretty
isn't any
brave.
danger in putting somebody underneath the Tesla coil with a chainmail suit over their head. I mean, we did it with Jim as a piece of, it just looked good and for good pictures. I'm just worried, my concern would be, Sanjay, is that are you actually getting genuine insight from it, or is it just let's do something that looks cool?
But you're the head of science and the Commissioner of Science at the BBC. You know it's okay to stand inside a Faraday suit and put 750,000 on. But interestingly, the audience didn't know that. And the audience that was there, that was comprised of Gavin Henderson's friends and family, they were absolutely shocked, as was he. He wasn't really very happy about going through it until he'd been through step by step. Why was it that the process would work, and what was the science underpinning that process working? So Gavin was persuaded of that, as were his friends. The fact that you know it doesn't need to say the audience.
Yeah, but hang on, okay, Maggie, Kate, which side do you want before we put it out to the vote? Maggie, which form of the electricity show would you go for? Which do you believe in? Which do you prefer?
Actually, I preferred the BBC version. Because, I don't know, but I think I love the jaded area. It's like, oh, another celebrity doing something. And I think, without seeing the whole programme, it's hard to know what science content was there. But at the moment, it looks like a celebrity doing a stunt, and I think, okay, another celebrity doing a stunt. And that's my gut reaction.
Kate?
Just from that clip.
Oh, I'm going to stick with Sanjay.
Excellent, okay, so we've got a split panel. Let's have the audience. Those voting for Jim Alkalini's Serious BBC4 electricity show. Wow, that's pretty good, it's pretty good. Those voting for Sanjay's schlocky electricity. I think Jim Alkalini wins that one. That's going to be such a brutal competitive. It was close. Okay, cool. So, what's next? Another form of television we need to examine. Yes, we're going to look at technologies used in the future of science programs, and we're going to show what technology can do. We might put another two kind of shows that go against each other if we've got time. So, Cassian, do you want to introduce this thing?
This is just actually, it's a show we did for Christmas, Polar Bears Fly in the Ice. It's actually a natural history show, but it is I really like John Dower as the guy who makes them. I really like him because what he does is he uses absolute state-of-the-art camera technology to do natural history like what we have never seen before. So we can just play this. It's from the end of the film.
Of all subjects ever filmed by spy cams,
running slow.
The polar bear has shown the greatest curiosity and intelligence.
The racer's had a stroke recently. That's what it's like to work for the BBC. It feels like this. It's what it's like to watch it for us. Or just hearing what...
This is what it's like every day.
This is how I feel when I'm watching Outcomes. This is how I feel. Honestly, it feels like...
5.5 million, David. They like it.
5.5 million pensioners. The polar bear.
Shall we stop it before David tries to humiliate me any further? It is a fix.
No one's
exactly.
going to vote for that, Cassie.
Well,
let's try Sanjay.
Okay, I might have lost this one due to technical failures in the transmission suite. Sanjay, off you go.
We're going to show a bit of one of your hit shows, One Born Every Minute. Just talk about the use of technology in there, whether that could be applied to science. Do you want to introduce it? Do you know what the clip is?
One Born Every Minute, we took the kind of methodologies used in Big Brother and other reality shows and put them into documentary areas. And we started with a family house, and then we most recently put it into a hotel, but in the middle we came up with the idea of putting it into a maternity.
It's always on my phone.
I'm sorry? Then we put it into a maternity ward. Principally to capture the human interest stories around lives changing forever as a baby's born, but also to capture some of the neo and prenatal science that you get in a hospital environment. So I'll show you a clip of that.
It's not like if you created a car or when you sewed a shirt or something. You look at something that's alive and has its own life and its own thoughts and its own being. You know it's a feeling quite without parallel. You think, well, you made that and it's alive, like Frankenstein. Obviously not quite the same thing. You didn't create a monster. You created a baby.
It's amazing, incredibly successful series, this, isn't it? One Born Every Minute. Why is the rig, we call it in TV, in the channel, the rig shows, where you basically have a Big Brother style rig and You probably all know that. And basically hoover up mountains of footage, put the best into the first couple of episodes, and then hope that the audience sticks with it for months and months. Why is it so successful, Sanjay? Is it going to take over the world?
I suppose it's a slightly different question, I suppose, to the one about science and so on, but I'd say...
Well, answer whichever one you want.
Okay, but in brief, I'd say I think our rig shows have been successful because they capture things you just don't get to see if you put cameramen and directors and so on in the room. I think if you find the right environment, which are generally quite private and secret spaces, whether it's a family bedroom or it's the maternity ward or whatever, you can capture interaction and subtlety and the minute drama of daily life and make those epic and truly dramatic. And I think that's what these programmes tend to do. So that's where it works there. I think in One Born Every Minute, it wasn't ever set out to be a science programme. I think there is actually some sort of takeaway scientific content within there. If you watch the last series, there was a triplet delivery. There's lots of content about pain relief, anaesthesia, about what you do in breech births, and I think a lot of people watching find that incredibly useful who are going to be going through the process of pregnancy. That's not why we set out to make it, but I think some of that comes through by osmosis, if you like.
Just on the subject of the success of One Born Every Minute, because One Born Every Minute is a real success online as well. And in this space, it was almost like before One Born Every Minute, there wasn't really a home online for maternity or kind of giving birth or midwifery. And with One Born Every Minute, we kind of created that. And you know, it's something that everybody has experience of. I mean, not that you can remember your own, but largely everyone has some experience of it, whether they've had a baby themselves or a friend or whatever. And so everyone's got that kind of absolute connection point, and therefore, and particularly women, I mean, women go crazy for it on Facebook because they love to share stories about their own birth. And you know, when One Born Every Minute is going out, the Facebook page is so lively with lots of people saying, OMG, I was just like her, and yes, I had to have an epidural last minute, and it's just that common experience that people want to talk about.
One Born Every Minute was my Bible. The series started when I was 7.5 months pregnant. And I must admit, I've been sort of following the pregnancy through and working out what's going on, but I hadn't actually worked out what was going to happen at birth. And to see it again and again every week. And some of my fellow mothers were saying that they didn't want to watch it because it freaked them out. But I thought, Heather did it. Immediately I get to the hospital, I'm going to go for that, I'm going to go for an epidural. Because I see the women just sort of chill out with the epidural. And so it sort of gave me a sort of step-by-step guide of exactly what I was going to do. So I found it fantastic.
So the thing I'm still sore about losing the last vote, but I'd say that I suppose
you're going to win this one, Sanjay, already.
My question for people like Cassian would be that, I mean, I know that there weren't a direct comparison to the Polar Bear programme and so on, but I kind of think we know what we're going to get with the Polar Bear programme. We've seen it all a million times before, and there's probably nothing you're going to tell me in that show. With One Born Every Minute, what we did there, I think, was we took, and with Family originally, we took documentary and we kind of reinvented it.
So that would be my question, is actually how many fixed rig series of Channel 4 commissioned from Dragonfly as a piece of innovative television?
Well, they've commissioned 3, but they're all BAFTA nominated, and one of them's won the BAFTA, and they're right through the roof, unlike the 3 of Electricity. And so I think that's not a bad track record, and I think if Channel 4 want to decommission their shows in favour of low-rating, unsuccessful, uncritically acclaimed programmes, they can feel free to do that. But
it's rather identifying, this kind of thing. Please, rather lowering the tone of my highbrow debate.
But my question, David, simply is this: is I think that what some of those formats have done is they've reinvented the way documentary was being made and told. In that it took out directors and cameras.
You put countless directors out of business.
Absolutely.
Machines.
But my question is, where's that sort of innovation in science programming? And that's what I'm trying to get at, really, which is where's that big step forward, which shows like One Born Every Minute did with documentary. A load of people at the time said, "What the hell are you doing? Who's going to watch that rubbish?" And
where's the innovation with the science program? Well, it's an interesting question, Andrew, but your memory is short because you should know that the rig came out of the science documentary, science Channel 4. We did Going Cold Turkey first of all, and then we did
Britain's Deadliest Addictions.
Britain's Deadliest Addictions, which were rigged shows in a clinic for people getting off drugs. So in fact, the innovation came from Channel 4 Science. It just became a hit somewhere else.
I think that's right, David, because you were the future once, but unfortunately it's
for everyone. I think why One Born Every Minute and Hotel and Family work is because it's human interest stories. And I think it's quite challenging to get human interest in science. It's possible, but I think it's quite a challenge. But I think that we probably need more of that, because scientists are seen as these strange people in ivory towers. And it's nice to show that we're human and we get excited. Scientists get incredibly excited when we sort of discover things and things like that. It's nice to try and capture that, because that's what transmits the emotion.
That's a perfect link, actually. That's very nicely said, because the next category, we put two heavyweights in the division up against each other, about enthusiastic scientists on their field. Okay. So should we start with the enemy, Brian Cox?
He's perfectly
I turned him down. Like every commissioner editor at Channel 4 before me, we all turned him down. And he now is an absolute superstar. He's fantastic. The nation loves him. And wherever I go, people say, well, for example, the place I go for a drink in London, and then barman knows I'm something to do with science television. And after a long day at work, I come in fed up and I have a pint. And he says, by the way, I love your Brian Cox. Honestly, everywhere I go, every day of my life, someone tells me how much I love. He stalks me. At the recent awards ceremony, at the RTS Awards, he won Best Presenter, Best Series. I thought they were going to give him the Lifetime Achievement Award. The guy is a huge success. I'm just tremendously jealous. But still, we'll see how he does with our audience up against the best that Channel 4 has done. So let's try Brian Cox if you've got him. He's amazing.
The more worlds we study, the more we realise that our solar system is a cosmic laboratory. Even the slightest differences in size or position can create a world radically different from its neighbours. Why is it that you chose a career on the boards?
Well, what I noticed was when I was doing equations, and on the rare occasion that I got one right, there was never any applause.
That's all we've got, that's plenty. Well, tell me why you're such a star. Tell me, do you love him, Maggie? Do you love him, Kate, Sanjay? Do you love Brian Cox?
Do you know what? Before I started working with you, David, I loved Brian Cox.
And there you go.
I was a big
Weeks
fan.
of bitterness and bile dripped into your ears.
That's precisely it. I sit back to back with David at the channel, and if I don't hear Brian Cox at least 10 times in a day, precisely, it wears you down. So unfortunately I've been influenced by David, and it has worn me down, and I'd say that I'm a little bit on the fence, but really I'm a closet Brian Cox.
What do you think, Maggie? Are you a fan?
Yes, I think I am. I mean, I was gutted when he did one. For the last 5 years, I've been giving tours of the universe to school kids across the country. And so I was trying to sort of sell the idea to sort of channels, saying, yeah, we should do something on the solar system. And then someone said, oh, but we've done it. So I thought, oh. But I think he did a fantastic job.
It's great having you on the panel, because you're the only other person that has a reason to murder him. So that's fair enough, but begrudgingly, he's great. What would you think, Sanjay?
Good job. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think he's an absolute superstar. I think he's a fantastic. Sorry to say this, David, on your panel, but no, I think he's unquestionably brilliant. I really like him a lot.
Okay.
If it's any consolation, he almost didn't do solar system. It was a huge internal battle. Lots of people thought he was rubbish then as well. So
Wasn't just me.
It wasn't just you. Even the BBC, we had doubts.
Okay, but tell me, Cassie, why is he so good? What's the secret of Brian Cox? Well, you don't know, it's hard to bottle.
It's hard to put a finger on. I mean, to be honest with you, I would be, shock horror, I would fess up that he's not actually particularly to my taste. I find that his grin and his amazings and all the rest of it, I do find them a little bit wearing sometimes, but clearly for an audience, and there is a big audience out there, he's got the perfect combination of being able to give authoritative science content, but to give them a sense of what it feels like, and to give them a sense of emotion, and to give them, that ability to communicate wonder. And I think that it's something that we shouldn't forget, because it's one of the great things about science, and that we always want to keep hold of in science television, is that an awful lot of what science has to offer us is amazing. It's really incredible, the solutions, the insights that the scientific method gives us. And I think his ability to do that, and I think the fact that audiences are really interested in and want to come to that sense of wonder is, I think,
I can't say much more of this. Hurry up.
Sorry.
It's great. Okay.
Can I just add one point, David?
Yeah.
I think, for me, I think the biggest thing is that ultimately he's the first scientist on TV that is somebody that I can relate to. I mean, I'm still under 30, and you know, I see Brian Cox, and I think really he's a bloke that I would quite happily have a pint with, and you know, in the pub. And he goes to festivals, and he's into his music, and he used to play keyboards and Dean Reed.
He's a pop star turned scientist.
Yeah.
I just think there's that level of absolute kind of, you can relate to him, I can relate to him.
Yes, great, okay. Well, anyway, I don't know if I dare do this. Let's try a bit of Channel 4's finest. We've got the next clip, a bit of Inside Nature's Giants, and put that up against him and see if we can knock him out. This is another presenter. Let's see what we've got here.
When ships explore the wild seas of the Southern Ocean, they send down trawl nets thousands of meters into the void. Sometimes they return with what seafarers used to call monsters of the deep. For us, there was one specimen we'd been waiting for, perhaps the most mysterious of nature's giants. In the tank behind me are two incredible giant squid that were caught by accident by a trawler fishing the deep ocean off New Zealand's South Island. They were frozen immediately on board, and we've been thawing them out overnight. We know nothing about them, not even what sex they are, but we're about to find out.
Okay. Not the best kid. Exactly. We don't need to discuss that. I mean, it's so clearly brilliant. I mean, maybe we should put it out to a vote. You know, this is almost like an IQ test for you. Let's have a vote. Those that prefer Brian Cox and his floppy hair and his amazing tour of everything, raise your hands. Anyone for Brian Cox? I can't really see any hands. And those for Inside Nature's Giants?
I mean, that's not fair.
Hang on, it's quite close to what I think.
No, that's a question of, and it's well worth saying, that Inside Nature's Giants is a brilliant show in terms of its form and the way that it works. And I would put my hand up and vote for that as a show. But as your talent...
Yeah, no, okay, fair enough. Yes. Thank you for that.
The marvellous presenter that was in, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's get to a bit on the panel. You want to argue now, it's just a little, how accessible should science programs be? Before we get on to the clip, I mean, it's an interesting thing about, you know, if you kind of dumb down TV too much, or let me tell you a story, an unnamed television executive, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently there was an executive, all the best stories of mine, I don't know if they're true really. Apparently there's this thing where there's this TV executive at the BBC who's got his new big, I think, living history series on the next day. And he thinks, oh God, it's so dumbed down, it's so rubbish. I better phone the head of the BBC and say, I'm so sorry, this has nothing to do with me. And then the next day it turns out to be an absolute mega hit. And Cassian felt absolutely terrible, didn't you, Cassian?
I did. I didn't quite say that.
Is it a true story, that?
Not quite, no.
Should we move swiftly on?
Yeah.
No. Well, I'd hit you to say that. Basically, but there is a question about whether we should make stuff that's massively populist and entertaining, or whether we should make stuff which actually does justice to maybe some of the hardcore science. And I hear you've got a radical view about where the future might be, or at least, you know, an example of something.
Well, it's another piece of Jim Al-Khalili, because I didn't realise there was Jim Al-Khalili on. I'm slightly worried, given the fact that the last one ran slow, that this won't work, but let's try it. This is the Everything and Nothing clip.
What's it called?
Everything and Nothing, two-part series we did for BBC 4 on its the science of how we understand how big the universe is. Let's try. I hope it will run well.
Okay, so what is space? We think we know the answer to this. I can talk about this room being spacious, there's a lot of space in here, or a confined space, there's not enough volume, not enough space. But does space only exist when there's stuff in it? Does space only have a meaning when it's enclosed by walls? think of the distance between two objects. Does that gap still exist if you take the objects away? What meaning can we give to distance if it doesn't have a start and end point? Ultimately, the question is this: does space in itself have form? Does it have structure or shape? Or is it just a place where things happen?
I mean, I can imagine when you get that into the edit, it might work, you know, I don't know. It's hard to
Oh, so you got 650,000, it's a very high audience for BBC 4. Absolutely.
Fair enough.
So I was going out the same time as Brian and his Wonders of the Universe, and the Twitter feed, which we all do like watching, actually, was that there was, what was fascinating about it was that there's clearly a huge audience out there, not huge, I mean a big, decent BBC 4 audience, that is really interested in science, which is absolutely not dumbed down in any way, shape or form. And actually what people enjoy about it is really the feeling of, well, as I always term it, having the top of your head sliced off and having Alka-Seltzer poured into your brain. That actually at the end of it, you don't really quite understand what it is that you've been learning about. And I think it's a worthwhile thing to remember that audiences aren't always looking for it to be made simpler for them.
Passionately put. Maggie, what do you think about that? Do you think that on the whole TV tries to dumb your stuff down? Or do you think that, you know, how do you approach that? Do you agree with what Cassie just said?
I think there's a place for both. Because sometimes when the science has been dumbed down, it gets not diluted, but it can get corrupted. And I think that's the worst fear of a scientist, that by trying to make it accessible, and I think making it accessible is a very important thing to do, but sometimes the science can get corrupted, so you're getting the wrong message really, and so it's not being translated correctly. But if you can take like something like string theory and make it accessible by using analogies, but very carefully, so you maintain the science, then I think it's a perfect thing to do. Because the more people who are interested in that sort of thing, the better.
I mean, what do you guys think, Kate? I mean, maybe online there might be a room for some Cassie and stuff.
Well, from my perspective, what is really interesting about going forward in the future and looking at things is that we are, you know, that we're not always going to consume content in a linear fashion, and so therefore, you know, where we're going and where we're headed, we will be equipped with the tools whereby there can be these additional layers of information, you know, and you can watch a programme to varying degrees essentially, be it kind of interactivity-wise or, you know, in the kind of genre of science. From kind of an encyclopedic perspective, you know, you can absolutely kind of drill down to certain bits, and the internet and online allows you to do that, which is really exciting.
What do you think, Sanj? People like me and you kind of assume the ignorance of the British public too far.
I think of course there's a space for that type of programme, and I'm glad that people like Cassie are making it. I suppose to me it just seems it's easy, really. I mean, I think to say, let's do the story of maths, the story of science, the story of whatever, and let's get an expert in to explain it all, and let's not worry particularly about the viewing figures, and let's put it on a channel that has the luxury and time and space to say, the audience actually doesn't matter that much as long as we super serve an audience that really gets us, that's fine. I think that's easy. What's much, much harder is to bring science that is more directly relatable to people's lives and bring them to an audience that isn't going to be sitting around watching that 10 o'clock on BBC 4. So how do you bring it to a much more mainstream, populist audience, and how do you do that in ways that continue to innovate and excite? Of course there's a space for that sort of stuff, but I think we could do that in our sleep, to be honest.
Have a look at the whole series before you decide that you can do it in your sleep, Sanjay.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? I think, I don't mean any disrespect, obviously, although I say...
Whereas strapping up a pig to a thing and slicing its guts open.
Well, no, but that,
exactly.
Yes,
It's
I
much harder.
Much harder than
the story of
I'll tell you what's
electricity.
hard about that, and I'll tell you what's interesting about that. We didn't just do that. We took an abattoir. We took the walls out of the abattoir and replaced it with glass. We brought an audience in to say, before you eat the meal you're going to be served, you're going to watch it being killed, and then you're going to watch it being butchered, and you're going to watch it being cooked. So it's actually saying, understand the food production process that's hidden from you before you eat your dinner. Now, of course, you can do that program in a very different way. So and I think that was a big innovation, and it absolutely worked for the audience it was aimed at, which is a BBC 3 audience. I don't mean to do that program down at all. I guess what I'm saying is I think that conventional scientific storytelling with a presenter explaining something in a way that a clever and sophisticated audience can understand is good, but it doesn't feel incredibly it doesn't feel innovative to me. It doesn't feel like the big challenge that should face popular science program makers of the future.
Okay, well that's interesting two views on it. Let's look into the future a bit more then now, and sort of try and say what are the things that might start to happen that will change the way we do science television. I mean, maybe Kate, you could give us a little guide to the future of the way you see it. What kinds of things are we going to be able to do using the computers?
I will try, but it's absolutely, it's always difficult to predict exactly what direction we're going to go in, but I can absolutely highlight exciting spots that we're in now. For starters, if we look at data and the explosion of how we can visualise data in exciting ways, and Cassian's worked on a really interesting project, Written from Above.
Which was, that a while ago now, but absolutely using, we were talking about it before, but I do think that there's, in a world where technology, be it the mobile phones, be it the apps, everybody is using technology and is recording information about them. I feel that there's a world out there, there's a whole new area of content which nobody's quite got their heads around, which is actually ways that we can understand the world and how we behave by using what our computers and the infrastructure and the internet record about us. I think that would be one thing.
Absolutely, and then a couple in that space as well, the continued live experimentation where, it's really interesting because it's less programs about science than it is just science on TV, which is a really exciting space to be in. And David and I are going to be working closely on Taking Drugs Live.
What are we doing? Tell them what we're doing.
What, David?
What are we doing?
Taking Drugs Live.
Taking Drugs Live. So basically, I can explain that if you want.
Is this a test run for it?
It is. It's an experiment. Can you hear me? Hello. So basically, a lot of the coverage of drugs, I'm getting a spiel together in my head, a lot of the coverage of drugs on television is mediated propaganda, or one way or the other, either pro or anti. And we're just going to try and bring you drugs trials unmediated, so you can actually see the effects of different drugs under scientific conditions, with scientists explaining the truth about what those drugs are actually doing to you. So it should be really obviously quite controversial, but also hugely educational, and putting information out there which the public really wants. So it's going to be fantastic, and whether it's going to be interactive, whether if you're stoned at home, you can tweet in and say, hey, I know what you mean, man. I feel exactly the same way. But to be more serious about it, I think it is a genuinely interactive project in that one of the things the scientists are interested in is how the audience will perceive these people's behaviour and that kind of thing. So we might use the television audience as part of the experiment in an interesting, exciting way. And obviously doing things live means you can be interactive, doesn't it? Obviously.
Yeah, definitely. And there probably will be a lot of scope as well within that project to work around data collection and actually getting a true representation of perhaps the drugs that people are taking out there and volumes, etc. Another quick spot which is interesting and growing is alongside connected TVs and all of it, we're going to have obviously UView coming in February 2012. But sound recognition is a thing that's happening more and more in the science space, and we've had a couple of conversations around programs that Dave's got going. But Grey's Anatomy, for example, they released an app whereby you watch the show and it's all clocked in basically to recognise sounds within the program and then deliver you content at certain points, so it triggers content.
So say that again. Does everyone understand that? That means that give me cash that out as an example.
Okay, so
you're watching your drama, and then what happens?
You're watching Grey's Anatomy, and say 5 minutes in, there is a sound within the program. You've got your app open that then triggers content within your app. So you get extra content. It might be a biog of a character, or it might be, see a deleted scene at this point. And so it fires content at you in sync with the TV. House have done something similar as well. And that's really interesting, I think, with regard to science, because if you can start exploring things from within a bit more a immersive context. And
so your iPhone is listening into the program, and when it hears the noise, it starts telling you the information. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and delivering you extra content.
Okay.
And along that line of immersive experiences, you've got, Black Eyed Peas released a 360 video, which you should download it. It's pretty cool. It's literally on your app, you've got it there, and you just move it, and it's like you're in a kind of a party, and you see everyone. It's as if you're actually in there. So imagine if you did that with, Inside Nature's Giants, and it was, a 360 video app, and you're there inside the animal, however it could be. But
I'm still getting my head around all the stuff you do. But the thing that's really exciting for a lot of TV people is watching the Twitter feed as just the programmes go out. I did a show called Jamie's Dream School with Jamie Oliver. Every night I'd sit there with my bottle of wine, the TV and the computer watching the Twitter feed. And the first thing that came up on the Twitter feed was, if they'd really wanted to inspire these kids, they'd have got Brian Cox to teach science. Literally, that's a true story. That's a true story. That's what it's like being me. That's true. That really happened. Bollocks to this technology. Anyway, so Cassie, you've got an example of something you've innovated. I can't believe it.
No, I wouldn't call it innovation.
Go on, you have. Don't be shy. You've tried something new.
No, we tried something. We decided that we'd see what would happen if we did animation for science programming. So it's not particularly a bit of inform, apart from the fact that, in fact, what it is it's I don't know, multiple channels of delivery, whatever the idea is. It's 10 things, it's based on the premise, 10 things you need to know about particular subjects. But what this is, it will be broadcast as a half-hour show, but it's also being done and delivered by Discovery Canada and a number of other broadcasters, purely an online thing as well, as individual 3-minute shows. So how we can do programming that is distributable across different platforms. Let's have a quick look at it.
Do you ever stop to contemplate the wonder of your body?
I should say it's not quite finished, so it's got Taylor's voice on it.
No, neither do I. But actually, it's the most complicated piece of engineering known to us, and it throws up some very puzzling questions.
Why do I catch colds? Where does wind come from? And what will we look like in 1,000 years?
For the answers, stick with me as we uncover the things you need to know about the human body. Right, let's get this show on the road, starting at the beginning. Daddy, where did I come from?
Your dad told you that he and your mother loved each other and decided to have a baby. Actually, it was a lot more complicated than that. If your father was an average guy, then about 280 million of his sperm entered the race to fertilise the female egg. They were blasted in at an impressive 28 miles an hour. But before they even got to the cervix, 210 million had dropped out. What happened? What we've got here are some very dodgy sperm. Some have 3 tails. There are 2-headed sperm chasing their tails, and some sperm with no tails at all. The problem is, a lot of human sperm is faulty.
Let's compare me with a rat and a pig. 100% of the rat's sperm will be strong swimmers, compared with only about 30% of mine. And the pig will produce 2 pints of sperm, whereas I will produce about a teaspoonful.
Not that your mother made things easy either. The sperm that made it into her cervix found themselves in a sticky maze. This mucus protects her uterus from germs. But it's also a hostile environment for sperm. The majority will never make it through. For the 100,000 that did, the race across the uterus is an exhausting marathon. By the fallopian tubes, we're down to just 200, and half of them swim up the wrong tube. The egg is only fertile for 12 to 14 hours. Sperm use protons to control their speed. In the final straight, they open pores in their tails, drop protons, and pick up speed. There can only be one winner. As a sperm finally enters the egg, a chemical message seals its surface shut.
So, if you ever feel down, remember this: you are the product of an Olympian sperm?
So, yeah, we're not quite sure where we're going to broadcast it or how, but we just really enjoy them.
So that's quite mental, isn't it? It's good.
That's the boring BBC for you, Dave.
No, it's good. I'm glad to see it. You're doing some good stuff over there. We're going to open it up in a bit so you can ask them questions or just, abuse the panel or whatever you want to do, really slag if they're up, but, or tell us what you think the future of science television might be. Maybe we should just kind of get a take on what do you think, Maggie, and kind of where do you think it's heading? What do you think is, what would you like to do in your presenting sort of thing? What do you hope the direction is? A few questions there, pick one you like.
The mention of self-experimentation I thought was really interesting, because there was, I think it's Michael Mosley programme, where he actually injects himself with some chemical and he goes totally loopy. And I found that so entertaining. It's just yacked and yacked and yacked. So I think the idea of us experiencing the science rather than just watching it, because I think it's the same sort of thing with school kids. If you talk to them about experiments, they sort of glaze over. But if you give them things to do, well, yeah, experiments you can do at home. Sort of, you need these chemicals, you mix them together, okay, hopefully you don't blow your house up, but things you can actually actively participate in. Because I think you can do that through online activities as well. And also I think getting some of the emotional content of science, and not just sort of, not just the sort of human science, but the actual emotion of doing science. Now, I think for this, you probably need sort of, the lots of cameras, because most of science is dull, 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 and you're sort of plotting away, and you're plotting away, and plotting away. But every so often you have those eureka moments, and capturing that on TV properly would be, I think, quite a revelation. Because scientists are seen as sort of quite dour, but see them when they've just discovered something, and they are quite emotional, let's put it that way. So I think things like that as well, that could be done using that format. So I think there's a number of opportunities out there, but I do like the idea of self-experimentation. And I might volunteer for the drug test. I don't know. I've never taken anything, but it might be interesting.
No, honestly, our phone lines got swamped as soon as we announced it. People volunteered to be guinea pigs. Sanjay, what do you think? Do you think that you could actually do sort of observational stuff of scientists, try and capture those eureka moments? Could you rig the work of scientists or not?
I'm sure. I think I'm not sure where the big new innovation is. I suppose what I'd love science to do a bit more is have a greater sense of scale and spectacle on television, in the sense that I think factual programs like Learning from Entertainment and started saying, okay, we'll make huge factual programs like The Apprentice and so on, and bring the kind of entertainment value that you get, production value you get from entertainment shows, and bring them to factual. And I wonder whether there's a bit more of that in the area of science. But the one thing we're doing actually for you, David, as you know, which I think is interesting, is we're taking a consultant anaesthetist and we're sending him to different trauma units around the world to look at how they practice their medicine and what we can learn from that. And what I think is really interesting there is it's a very different use of a presenter. He is a presenter, but he's also a working doctor. We have to do this during his annual leave. And when he's in these situations, he's kind of I don't quite know what his role is, because he's both a presenter but he's a doctor, therefore he's in the trauma unit and he can do things and he can explain exactly what's happening, but equally it raises some quite difficult ethical issues as well, because he could, if he wanted to, make an actual intervention that could make a difference in some situations. I know you'd love to see that, David, on TV, but it presents a lot of moral and ethical dilemmas.
I was saying, kind of, can't we have him like Keith Floyd, kind of saving the life while kind of, talking about how he's doing it. And Sanjay would say it's not that simple, David. You know what I mean? So, you can't basically be saving lives and talking through it like a chef. But we've got as close as we possibly can to that, and it's very immersive. It's kind of, I think hopefully you'll like it. A guy called Kevin Fong is a rising superstar, and hopefully a kind of future of science. It's me and Cassian, the new Brian Cox, got the same agent actually, and me and Cassian fight over his time vociferously. And before I open up to the audience, maybe I should just tell you the story of my most successful science program this year in terms of ratings. But you mustn't tell anyone. But basically, it's a bit of an embarrassing story. But basically, when the Japanese tsunami happened, Pioneer Productions phoned up and said, should we do a fast turnaround about it? So I talked to my boss Ralph and said, great. We tried to get it on the air incredibly quickly. And there's a real kind of market, I think, for fast turnaround television. So you really feel like you're getting the actual story of some news event very, very, very quickly. And we sent out a kind of a seismologist who was flying around in a helicopter, Jay Hunt, head of Channel 4, wanted it on kind of the Thursday after it happened or something. So actually the footage only started, well, my boss Ralph had to go on holiday, leaving me in charge, which is a bad start. And then basically the footage only started arriving back on Sunday, and the programme goes out on Thursday. So on Monday I had a viewing of kind of just almost an assembly of bits and pieces of footage, and I was almost nothing to say, but I gave a few comments because I always do, you know. And I said, when am I going to see it again? And they said, well, David, you know, don't tell anyone, but there's no time for you to see it again. And I'm like, what do you mean there must be time for me to see it again? You know, I have to sign it off. And they're like, we know what you're like, you'll have more and more comments, you know what I mean? We'll never get it on air, you know what I mean? We have to be on air on Thursday night. So I'm like, oh, well, you know, I don't know, Ralph's all, so I kind of I'm and ah about it. I think, okay, fine, I'll help write the commentary. So I help write the commentary, spend a day writing the commentary, but I think I'll watch it when it goes out, which is a bit scary and probably against the rules of what you're supposed to do at Channel 4, so I'd be grateful if you didn't tell people this story. Anyway, so the night it goes out, I think before it goes out, I have a quick drink with my friend in documentaries, Mark Raphael, who's very nice. So we have a couple of pints, you know what I mean? A couple of pints turn into 3 or 4 pints, and I look at the time, Christ, I'm going to miss it, you know what I mean? He goes, you can get it on Channel 4+1. I go, okay, fine, watch it on Channel 4+1. And then we have a few more pints, and then, Christ, I've missed it on Channel 4+1. And I'm now completely missed. So I basically go home and collapse and fall asleep. And the next morning I wake up and there's an email from Jay Hunt, head of Channel 4, saying, David, you're a genius. I don't know how you actually turned around a programme of that quality. And it got 3.5 million views or whatever it was, you know, and please pass on my thanks to the production company. So I phone up the production company and go, what a show, you know, it's a great program. They still don't know this, by the way, I heard they're not here. I go, it's a brilliant program. I try not to actually lie, I kind of say, you know, what a result, and phrases like that don't actually imply I've seen it. And then, anyway, it took the edge off the hangover, and I kind of stagger into work, and everyone's like patting me on the back, and people are saying, how do you do it? I'm like, oh, it's really much less to it than you might imagine, you know. And I go, no, it's brilliant, you know. And then basically Ralph then appears in the office back from his holiday, and he goes, David, brilliant. I go, well, you know, Ralph, it's a bit embarrassing, you know, didn't really do that much on it. He goes, well, keep it under your hat. I've been on holiday all week, you know, I didn't want to. So the two of us kind of do a lap of honour around the office, taking orders from everyone, you know. And then finally, at the end of the day, I kind of stagger home, and I watched it on 4OD, and it's a damn good show. But that's the story of my most successful science programme, and almost nothing to do with it. So, that's not the future, I hope, though. It might be the future. Yeah, the future of science television will have less than me in it.
Us not watching it.
Yeah, that's right.
Not interfering, I think that's it.
Yeah, I know that Sanjay's nodding. It's a fantasy, that's the for Sanjay. I've driven his head in so for months, you know. The idea of, you know, I shouldn't tell you that story, Sanjay. Anyway, I'll bother you instead. So, if anyone's got any questions, comments, come on, think of something. There we go. Do we have a microphone? Wait for the microphone. Say who you are. And ask whatever you want, or say whatever you want.
Thank you. Gillian Mosley from Media Lab. We've heard how the programmes are getting bolder, bigger, more shocking, fast turnaround, etc., and basically us TV producers are doing great jobs of innovating our form. But science itself is a discipline which is constantly innovating, and I'm wondering where the groundbreaking science is.
Say that, sorry.
Where is the groundbreaking science? Where are the new discoveries? Where are the constant innovations? The medicine, you know, nanotechnology, whatever.
Basically, the question is, I think to paraphrase it, we've been talking about innovation of TV form, but what are the exciting actual areas of science? And maybe we start with Maggie there.
Because I think one of the most exciting areas of science at the moment is synthetic biology. I only in fact sort of heard about it about a year and a half ago. And this is actually sort of making mitochondria, making living cells. And I don't know how you can capture that on TV, but the idea of actually creating life, not in a womb, is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, sorry, what I actually meant.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I mean, that's a very good answer and the question of why I'm capturing and putting the answers in. But what I'm trying to say is, why are we not seeing anything on actual groundbreaking science while we're watching all of our television innovations?
Because I think the panel itself is about television and what we're doing in terms of making television. I think, and I'm sure that, you know, from the BBC's perspective, we always try and capture or choose the right moment, particularly with Horizon, to look at the cutting edge of various scientific disciplines, and we'll always be doing that journalistic job. I think that's a really important thing for science television to be doing, but it's one section, and I think David would agree, of a whole slew of different kinds of things that you can do with science television. I think the journalism side is really important, but it's a component.
I think that it's a good attack, frankly, and I think that there is a whole maybe where Tomorrow's World used to be. We're actually doing a big series with Stephen Hawking's sequel to the Genius of Britain series, which is about the history of British science, which is now about exactly what you're asking, the latest, most cutting-edge breakthroughs. Maggie, I hope is going to be presenting something.
I was filming on Tuesday.
Okay, cool. How did it go?
Oh, well.
Alright, cool. That's good. So basically, we're doing it. Me and Maggie are. I'm not sure about the BBC. You're right. The BBC is all living in the past over there. Any more for any more? There's a question up the back.
First of all, I just learned that sperm have vertebrates. That was really interesting. I thought this is. I didn't know that. What about scratch and sniff? You know, I remember Divine and how we used to sit and scratch, and maybe there could be a good little bit of old technology in that. You did do a 3D show, didn't you? Which was not, of course, science, but it was...
Yes, the Queen in 3D.
Yeah, the Queen in 3D.
Yeah, not my most popular commission.
No.
But we did it. So why you want some old school technology?
Well, what about of course, 3D was old school technology. So, you know, I'm thinking scratch and sniff was good. Or did you ever go to a scratch and sniff show?
I'm not sure I did.
Does anybody see Divine?
Sanjay, you're old enough to remember the smell vision, are you?
Remember Divine? Remember Divine? Anyone? My God, right, okay, Divine. So what you used to do was you'd actually, when you went into the cinema, you got a card, and on it was smells, and I'm thinking of the sense of smell here, you know, and it's, instead of it all being visual, we do a bit of olfactory stuff.
Well, that's a surreal point you're making.
You basically scratch.
Yeah, no, okay, scratch. I've got the idea. Scratch and sniff.
As you look on the screen, you sniff.
Okay, well, I mean, why don't you pitch it at Cassian later? I think you might well be interested in that. No, seriously, honestly, I think that Cassian's got loads of money for that kind of thing. He needs to innovate. So a bit of smell-o-vision should be Cassian's way. There's a man in the front there.
There seems to be a confusion when people talk about science on television. There's a confusion to me between factual description of the natural world or apparently authoritative description of how the world works. And other times people are talking about scientific evidence and how science is interpreted. And I think those are confused a lot in your programs, and I just wondered what people thought about that. So I thought, for instance, that one of the good things about the Jim Al-Khalili program is that he talks about evidence and maybe this is how it works, and therefore people start to get an idea. They're thinking about, is that true, is that not true? Whereas other things we're told, this is how it happens, this is how it works. And I think there's a real problem when you come to some of the major issues in how the public deal with science, in that they're not sure whether are they being told what the answer is, or sometimes we're told you're not supposed to be told what the answer is, because science never tells us anything, it just tells us what might happen.
There's a film about global warming. I don't remember that one. Does anyone want to pick that up? It's a powerful point. What do you think?
Yeah, because I think there are programs about the scientific method, and I think understanding the scientific method is very important, because as you say, I mean, the Daily Mail, caffeine causes cancer. Daily Mail, drink caffeine, you won't get cancer. And there's bits of evidence supporting both, but people don't know how to judge them because they just see the headlines. So trying to, I think, demonstrate the scientific method, I think it's quite challenging to do it in an interesting way, but I think it's also very important. And I think it would be nice if it's generally incorporated in science programs. So as you say, it's not just, this is the fact. As a scientist, I don't think we should ever say that. This is what we think is true at the moment, and this is based on this evidence, because that's the way the scientific method works. So I think if we can integrate that into our programs, people, the general public, might get a better understanding of where these strange headlines come from.
But when the evidence is overwhelming, you know...
Yes, I mean,
the Earth is round.
The Earth is round.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think we should demonstrate that there was very strong evidence to support that. But if I was going to be a very rigorous scientist, evidence is one thing, and it's supporting a theory, and the theory looks very strong. It's like, do you believe in God? It's, I have no evidence to support that theory. So I think we need to get to the detail of the scientific method. But I don't think you could do a programme on the scientific method, but I don't think many people would watch it. So I think if you can incorporate it in programmes, it would be much better.
For me, it's more about when you're telling the story, you're doing it in the context of the scientific method, and actually your live driving trial sounded like, when you talk about what you do in the future, that sounded like a way where you are introducing people, you're talking about in the context of what does it all mean.
Yes. Well, I think it's a powerful point, and to be honest, all we do is try to explain things by stealth. So a lot of things we've shown you are very showy, but actually whenever we can explain a bit of the scientific method, it's thrilling to actually do that. I think, to be fair, Michael Mosley often does with his programmes, make those kinds of distinctions and explain why there was evidence and explaining the scientific method itself. And I think that's a very valuable thing to do. We do try and smuggle it through, but I think you make a very powerful point that often we don't make a distinction between what we would consider fact and what's kind of evidence-based or that kind of thing. So I think it's a powerful intellectual point, raising the tone of this debate. Okay, anyone else in the front row? Yeah. Sorry, then we'll go around.
Hello, I'm Nikki Huggett from Wingfold. Also, Cassie and I thought you did a scratch and sniff thing with Filthy Cities.
Did we do a scratch?
Yeah, it was in the Radio Times.
BBC so large, I can't remember.
Yeah.
The main thing that I was thinking about was our fantastic genetic fridge magnets we did for the gene programme. So we do things that you can have at home.
Well, it was just my comment about the next big thing and where we're going. After that clip wasn't the best of Inside Nature's Giants. But just to say that after our first series, David posed the question, how we're running out of giants, where do we go now? And he was very helpful in saying to us, well, it's actually about the team. And it's when Maggie says how exciting it is when people discover things, I think we found that that's the way to move the brand on, is to have a group of presenters and it's their experience together. And that's been fantastic for us to watch them at work on expeditions, and it becomes less of the clinical dissection and more of the experience.
So the interaction between
yes, is really.
But I think that is one of the fundamental things that has appeared, I think, over the last few years, that it has lots of different names to it. Factual theatre is one of them. But I think that the really interesting thing is that we do lots of stuff, and David does as well, which is just, the presenting there telling you the story of science. But I think what's always most interesting, and what becomes most appealing to audiences, and I think what we all on this panel will probably find the most appealing and most challenging to do, is using science not as a subject, but as a method, as a way of actually building and constructing the narrative of television. Because science does have, it has an inbuilt narrative to it, which is you have a problem which you don't know the answer to, and you engage in experimentation in order to try and find the solution to it. And I think the best and most exciting science on television is really interesting, and it is the kind of stuff that Sanjay does. It's things that Sanjay's even done for me with the Human Power Station, where you set out a problem and actually the journey to finding the solution gives you your scientific narrative. I think that's what Inside Nature's Giants does as well, so successfully. Brilliant series.
Any more? Yeah. Someone here, then let's go here.
Hi, Jack Lewis. I'm a neuroscientist and a guest of the Wellcome Trust. I've got a quick question for Cassie and one for you, Dave. Cassie, you mentioned Mike Mosley earlier, and I'm slightly confused because, as I understand, to present on the BBC, you need to be an authority figure. But as I understand it, Mike Mosley didn't complete his medical degree, so is he really an authority figure? Is there a bit of a contradiction there? And Dave, for you, does it have to be shock and gore to get science on Channel 4, or is there another route? Is there more space in the kind of Jamie Oliver dream school of creating emotional experiences on screen rather than necessarily shocking and gory ones?
Sorry, you go first.
Yeah, and I think with Michael, I think it's a little unfair to say, put it this way, in terms of authority figures, we're not necessarily, and I don't think anyone should be checking off everybody's list of qualifications. Mike has started doing a medical degree, but didn't finish it, but he's also spent 20 years making science programmes for the BBC as an executive producer. So I think he's pretty qualified to do what he wants to do, and I don't think we're misrepresented on that front.
I think it's a good sort of point you make in terms of our output. There's probably a hell of a lot of kind of blood and dissection at the moment because of Inside Nature's Transverse other things, but we do a lot of other things. We do Stephen Hawking on the universe, we do Kevin Form, so it's not necessarily kind of shock and gore. We have a whole actual range of stuff, but I think that the thing about Channel 4 is you're always going to find a way of being slightly different or slightly controversial. It's almost like cooking with a little chili sauce. So it's kind of like adding a little bit of something which you kind of think that makes it slightly spicier, something that perhaps the BBC wouldn't do in a hurry. And that's our remit, is to put the cat amongst the pigeons, you know what I mean? But we should find more exciting ways of doing that. And, I'm getting, I'm not tired of dead animals, but I don't just want to think about, kind of dissecting an exotic butcher's shop or selection. And we should move to all sorts of other kinds of things. But controversy is, I quite like, if I'm honest. Yes, there's loads of questions now. Another guy there on the end.
I'm just curious about the failures in innovations. You might have tried out various things, an old panel. It might be something you tried that really didn't work. I would just be curious to know about that. And if you tried non-narrative based science documentaries.
Well, there's so many from my case. Do you want to Sanjay? Do you want to take that one? What's your worst disaster?
It's a very tough question. I suppose it's difficult. It's difficult to answer that in the sense of, do you mean a program that just didn't rate and didn't succeed and didn't match channel expectations, or do you mean something that we feel didn't fulfil its purpose as a science program? I suppose, what's your definition of success or failure?
Specifically innovations you tried. You've talked about new things you've done that have changed the approach of shooting and filming. Is there been sort of attempts to film in a different way that just didn't work? And in terms of for you as the creator, not the audience, but as the creator, you thought, this just doesn't work for me, I'm not going to put that out?
I can't, not through any lack of humility or anything, I can't think of anything that we've actually tried that just went catastrophic.
There's a plane in there. That's not I'll tell you a quick story. Me and Sanjay have been trying to crash a jumbo jet plane in a scientific experiment for a long time, and we announced it years ago. We're still wrangling over commissions. I don't know if it's going to happen. But I'll tell you a funny story which Sanjay doesn't know, which is that I was at the Broadcast Awards, and I was a bit drunk, and someone goes, how's that plane crash coming on? And I go, oh, it's absolutely terrible, we can't get any permissions, the insurance has run out. I give them the whole story of what a disaster it is. And then Ralph, my boss, pulls me away and says, that's a broadcast journalist, you idiot. And then we have our monthly phone call with Sanjay's team, and they go, David, we're really sorry, but somehow broadcast seems to have heard of us. See if we've got a leak somewhere. And I'm like, Sanjay, this is not good enough. You've got to try and get your team to be a bit less leaky. You can really do without this right now. And they're like, we're really sorry, really sorry. That was me. If you do that, that was my fault. But sometimes we bite off more than we can chew. I've had a long list of programs that didn't quite connect to the audience as much as I thought they were going to. I always go in with huge expectations, kind of thinking it's going to be a massive hit. But it's too long and lengthy to go into. We've got probably time for just one more question. Someone waving their hand in front of you here. And then we'll wrap it up. Last question.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Wild, a clinical psychologist with the Wellcome Trust. My question is for Sanjay, and I think you have a really challenging role to bring science to people who have no interest in it. And so using very shocking, sensational images. But I wonder if you ever follow those kids up to see if they get into science, if they stay interested in it, or what they take away from the program.
The answer is yes and no, actually. Certainly with Kill It, Cook It, Eat It, which went BBC Three, we went back and followed up on, we made a programme for the BBC in which we went back and found out what did they experience do for them, and how did it change their own attitudes towards the meat that they consumed and why. So we did a bit of follow-up with that. I suppose as individual program makers, we wouldn't go and do that necessarily, I don't think. But I think where we've been with it, I think there's an editorial idea to go back. We've done it with Kill It.
There's a story about that people do get a lot of science from television. I think the Wellcome Trust commissioned some research where they went out onto the street and asked people, where do you get your scientific knowledge? And the general public looked rather blankly, and then they said, okay, it's a multiple choice. Do you get it from the science journals? And they went, no, not really. Do you get it from kind of the science website? No, not really. They go, what about television documentaries? They go, yeah, that's right. That's where we get our science knowledge from. And that's very kindly means that the Wellcome Trust fund things like this. It only leaves me to thank Rachel Lamborn and Catherine Wood from the Wellcome Trust for putting this on. Thank you very much indeed. And to thank my fantastic panel. Sanjay, Kate, Maggie and Cassie, thank you very much. Thank you very much.